Welcome, everyone, to Career Happy Hour. It's Friday. I'm Andrew Beach, Executive Coach. I help professionals like you communicate their value to find great new opportunities faster, whether you're working or not. It's good to see all of you here today. Let me know where you're joining from. Be happy to hear from you on this fine Friday. May Day. Happy May Day, everyone. Good to see you. Let me get my messaging open here so I can respond to your messages on LinkedIn. And we'll get that rolling here. So let me know what questions you have as relates to, let's see, there we go. As relates to your career, networking, market planning, interviewing, whatever you want to talk about, I'm here to answer your questions. And as soon as I get my messaging open here, I'll be able to see your questions here on LinkedIn. So good to see you all. Happy to have you here. We're going to continue our discussions actually about networking and continue our book club. The book club right now is the National Business Employment Weekly book on networking. I'll show you a copy of that. It's a yellow book. It's done by the Wall Street Journal. It's published, I think, in 1994, early 90s, and a lot's changed since then. A lot of the concepts are universal, and we all pretty much know why we should network. What we don't know is how to network, and that's what this book really does a great job at. It's the Wall Street Journal National Business Employment Weekly book on networking. They also have, I believe, a book on interviewing. Let's see, they have a book on resumes and interviewing, cover letters, and alternative careers. So there's, it sounds like 5 books in the series, but this one's on networking, insider strategies for tapping the hidden market where most jobs are found, and I highly recommend it. You should see in the chat somewhere a link to get that book. Now, that book is out of print. So just make sure that if you are going to pick up that book, that you know it's a used copy, and they're likely going to charge you like $1.99 for it, which is nice. I like getting books for cheap too, so it's really helpful if you can do that. Get those books for cheap. The shipping is typically a lot more than the cost of the book itself, but we're going to get into that here in just a second. Again, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and leave those in the chat. Let me know where you're joining from. As always, this is free coaching for you. So I'm here to support your success. I do the trainings just to have something to sharpen our saw and to be a little more proactive in sharing value here every week, Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific time. If you could click the share button down below and put it onto your favorite social network, whether that's LinkedIn or Facebook, Twitter, whatever works for you. Just copy it wherever you're watching this from. We do broadcast this to Periscope, YouTube, Facebook, in my group, and also on LinkedIn. So if you have any questions at all, I'm here to answer and happy to do so. So good to have you here. So let's continue our discussion, our reading of Chapter 10 in the National Business Employment Weekly book on networking. Chapter 10 is titled Alternative Approaches and Techniques. And this is something I think that really is going to touch on what's happening today with COVID. So I think you'll find it really valuable. So this is Alternative Approaches and Techniques, Chapter 10. Why is the most popular networking transaction a personal referral to someone followed by a face-to-face meeting? Because it's easiest on everyone involved. It's by no means the only effective networking avenue. However, it can be supplemented by a variety of other approaches and meeting styles. As we noted earlier, modern networking owes much to executive search consultants, aka headhunters, who learned that personal contacts produce good information. That's also one of the reasons that LinkedIn was established and got wider market acceptance by the recruitment community, because that was how they could execute their networking. Skilled and seasoned headhunters have legions of personal contacts that they can call to get a search rolling. But they'll also tell you that a lack of existing network or a of a supply of personal referrals isn't an insurmountable barrier to commencing a smashing networking campaign. Cold calls work just fine, provided you become adroit at making a positive first impression on the phone, reducing the contact's defensiveness, and getting to the point in a hurry. Caveat there, you may be reaching out by LinkedIn message, email first, but at some point you're going to increase almost exponentially your results if you pick up the phone and make a phone call. Think of your own mental processes when your secretary says that someone whose name you don't recognize is on the line, or when you pick up the phone and hear an unfamiliar voice. Your mental organizing and risk reduction apparatus immediately poses several frame of reference questions to which you want to immediately answer. So answering these 4 questions, and this is something you can actually do also in your email introduction or a LinkedIn message or perhaps even a LinkedIn connection request. Number 1, who are you? Number 2, why are you calling me? Number 3, what do you want? And number 4, what are the stakes, upside and downside in this transaction? Every person you cold call will have the same issues and concerns, so be ready with the answers. Even outline your opener if you have to. This is a scripted response or example. Quote, Mr. McKee, we haven't met, but I'd certainly like to meet with you. My name is Brent Anderson, and I'm calling to see if it might be possible to arrange a brief networking meeting at your convenience. I've read your articles on healthcare reimbursement policies, and I noticed that we both graduated from Kenyon College. I've just completed my master's in public health at UCLA, and before going back to school, I spent 4 years in emergency room operation at Cedars of Galilee Hospital in Los Angeles. I now want to return to Chicago to continue my career, and everywhere I turn in the medical community around here, your name keeps coming up. Is there any chance we might get together? Many networkers hate cold calls because they feel they're being intrusive and they're asking for an awful lot without the lubricant of a common acquaintance. All but the wildest extroverts among us tend to shy away from the prospect of calling a complete stranger and springing our personal agenda on them. In our mind's ear, the call sounds like this, and I quote, Hi, you don't know me, but I'm running a job search and I would be desperately grateful if you met with me and gave me some of your precious time and advice and take responsibility for my life. You'll be risking personal embarrassment if I should turn out to be a complete turkey, but still should introduce me to all your friends and contacts, unquote. Go ahead and feel that way, but your life and career are on the line. Compared with the assertive and insistent tone used by most headhunters, your call won't sound as presumptuous as you're afraid it will, and it's likely that you'll be treated like a telemarketing solicitor. For your information, this is a sidebar. Tips for telephone networking. This should be good. Getting a memorable message across while networking by telephone is harder than in person, but it is possible, even during COVID. The key to success in such calls lies in capturing and containing the contact's interest. Your tools for accomplishing this are limited. The contact can't appreciate your effortless grace, impeccable dress, warm smile, twinkling eyes, or affirming hand-in-hand gestures. Without those supportive aids, you can, here's some things you can do without those supportive aids. Your agenda must be clearly focused and articulated, number 1. Number 2, the content of your speech must be clear and concise. Number 3, the delivery of your message must carry a lot of weight in building rapport, creating trust, establishing authority, and sustaining interest. Other than its increased focus and abbreviated duration, telephone networking parallels face-to-face networking by requiring 1, decompression, 2, a brief self-description, 3, a job search or career change objective, 4, targeted Q&A, 5, requests for names and referrals, and 6, a polite close and promise to follow up. Okay? Identifying your granfalloons. Never heard of that word, granfalloons. In his book, Cat's Cradle, Kurt Vonnegut, whose work embodies a slightly out-of-control view of life that strikes a responsive chord with many networkers, invented an utterly spurious religion in which he introduced the notion of a granfalloon. A granfalloon is a group of people whose lives and fates appear somehow related, often by virtue of geographic happenstance, membership in some group, or participation in a common activity. In fact, there's no fundamental intersection between the interests and destiny of members of a granfalloon, but its members believe and act as if there is. Some typical granfalloons include, some examples, Hoosiers, the 1973 graduating class of Kansas State University, the United States Senate, bird watchers, all the others made sick by the driving of the tour bus driver on your most recent vacation, every other general counsel of a publicly held corporation, Aggies, political button collectors, unemployed job hunters over the age of 40. Yeah, see, these are common. These are like affinity groups. So they're called granfalloons, affinity groups. Being a member of a granfalloon gives you some interpersonal leverage with other members. If you can use that leverage to break the ice and establish a basis for asking for a little help. Here's an example, and I quote, Jeff, I don't know if you remember me or not, but we were in the same graduating class at med school in '72. I've been getting in touch with a number of my old classmates to see if I might get a little advice and counsel as I work through a career shift. ... Unquote. Here's another example. Quote, Leah, this is Claude Bennett. Your daughter Deidre and my son Ian go to the Fuzzy Bunny Daycare Center together. Listen, I'm in the middle of a job search, and I thought one way to get a little more market exposure would be to go through the center's parent directory, introduce myself to the parents of some of Ian's little friends, and maybe do a little informal networking. Unquote. Here's another example. Quote, Ed, this is Evan Monroe calling from downtown Tupelo. I've been calling a number of colleagues in the Business Forms Manufacturing Association to see if I might arrange to drop in on you when I make my rounds through Mobile early next month. Unquote. Granfalloons represent ready-made mini networks that you can mine to broaden your market exposure without the greater discomfort of cold calling. You may be a member of scores of granfalloons, and each membership gives you a supply of people to whom you have a common bond, however minimal, and whom you can call by their first names. This last point isn't incidental to your comfort level. Adults, especially men, tend to dislike being forced into the superior-subordinate relationship implied by having to call someone Mr. or Ms. last name. If you absolutely cannot think of any group of people with whom you have something in common, grab a directory, or any directory, where you're already listed or could be listed if you wanted to pay a membership fee. And if required, contribute to the goals of the organization you're joining. If you haven't checked out the astonishing variety of directories, databases, and lists that are available today, you're in for a major surprise. Compiling granfalloons is a real growth industry. You can even buy or rent granfalloons from direct mail houses that compile mailing lists. Just tell one of these vendors the granfalloonian attribute you want to tap or the kind of person and position you want to contact, officers, senior managers, researchers, and so on, and they'll provide a list of current names for you to call or write. Want databases for academic, nonprofit, or government affairs? They're all available. Beware, though, many of these databases are obsolete, incomplete, and rife with errors. Ask to see a simple list, find out how frequently it's purged and updated, and then compare the pricing closely with competitors' charges. A few ground rules are in order when using granfalloons to extend your network. We'll get into that in just a second, but I think one of the nice things is with social media today, especially LinkedIn, there's lots of groups. There's lots of ways you can filter and search LinkedIn. A lot of the stuff that you would typically in the olden days pay for is now available for free on LinkedIn. That's what makes it so enormously valuable. And people are putting their contact information. Every profile, by the way, has a contact information button. So here are a few ground rules that are in order when using granfalloons to extend your network. 1. Be sure to state the nature of your relationship at the beginning of your call. Don't let someone wonder who you are and why you're using up valuable time. 2. Be clear that you're making contact with a lot of members of the Grand Falloon. To select one person and imply that you're asking him alone to help you is to suggest a level of duty that isn't supported by the facts, and it could be considered stalking. 3. State clearly the type and level of help you're asking for. Low stakes are better, of course. Here are some sample scripts. Quote, "At this point in my job search, Helene, I'm simply trying to contact as many Coolidge High grads as I can to ask that they keep their ears attuned to any information about possible jobs for experienced programmers." Unquote. Here's another example. Quote, "All I'm trying to do, Leo, is get the word out to as many brothers of the Mystic Knights of the Sea as I can and ask that they think of me if they meet someone who needs a Cracker Jack sales rep." Unquote. Because of the level of help being requested in a Grand Falloon contact is so minimal, assume in the tone of your call that you're entitled to and will get help. Don't water down your request with, quote, "if it's not too much trouble," unquote, or, quote, "if it's okay," unquote. The moment you assume the role of a supplicant, the power of a Grand Falloon's gentle peer pressure utterly vanishes. If in the name of finding a job, resuming your life, and avoiding starvation you're not comfortable with this minimal degree of presumptuousness, then stay away from Grand Fallooning. When there is no place for face-to-face, this is the next section in the book, when there is no place for face-to-face. We've emphasized the importance of networking in person whenever possible, both because people exchange a great deal of information non-verbally and because people remember faces better than they remember sound waves or written words. Sooner or later, however, your networking activity is going to lead you out of town, either because a valuable contact or two lives outside your one-day travel radius, or because in your efforts to run a geographically diverse search, you are trying to develop sub-networks in far-off places. Just a note, a caveat here, the book that we're reading, a lot of the video stuff that we're doing now, in fact, the video you're seeing today, was not available back then. And the next best to face-to-face is a video chat. So here's a sidebar for your information. Why are you calling me? Even if you lack close personal connections for referrals, you can use other rationales to open doors, such as, "I'm new to this town and I don't know anyone." That's a great one, actually. People new to an area have a perfect excuse. "I'm coming home after years of working overseas." "I've read your book and it transformed my life." I did that actually with the author of this book. I reached out to him and gave him kudos on writing a really exceptional book that I found valuable. "Everyone says you're the leading expert around." That's a great compliment. "I want to follow in your footsteps." "We went to the same college or grad school." "We have blank in common." "We're members of the same association or organization." "We're peers in the same industry even if we've never met." Some of these are a stretch, but still, the method of communication and the way you communicate is more important than what you're communicating. When they say that words are only about 7% of communication. When telephone networking, it's a good idea to outline your agenda in some detail before dialing. The good news is they don't see that you have or are working an agenda. It's on the phone. They don't see anything. Have your self-introduction prepared and practiced, but not to the point of sounding canned and artificial. Have the general agenda and the specific sequence of issues you want to discuss written out in front of you. Understand that because a telephone networking conversation will be shorter than a personal meeting, 40 minutes on the phone is an outrageously long time, you bear greater responsibility for steering the meeting, keeping it focused, and making smooth and crisp transitions from one subject to the next. I would also actually encourage you, if you can, if you're doing any kind of phone networking or interviewing, stand up if you can. It's going to project more energy. When you're sitting, your diaphragm is compressed. I typically do these sessions, these FAQ Fridays or these career happy hours standing. But since I'm doing book club, it's much easier and more comfortable for me to sit and read from the book. But no, when we're done with book club, I'll go back to standing. Don't assume that you're immediately going to start networking when you first call. When you get to the point of describing what you want from the contact, you should offer the person the choice of proceeding now or scheduling a later specific time to conduct the conversation. These people aren't sitting around waiting for your phone call. So here's an example. Quote, "If it's not possible to get together for a brief meeting, I was hoping I might still get your advice and counsel for a few minutes on the phone. I realize you weren't expecting my call, and I don't want to disrupt your busy schedule. If you have a few minutes now, that would be great, but if it makes more sense to arrange a time for me to call back, that's certainly fine too. I have 3 or 4 areas I'd welcome your thoughts on, and I think we could cover all the bases in less than 15 minutes. If we could be less rushed at some other time, perhaps first thing in the morning or at the end of the workday, I'll be happy to schedule a time to call back." If the contact agrees to schedule a time, you absolutely must call precisely at the agreed on hour. Check for any difference in time zone. That's huge. A lot of folks that I interact with are on East Coast, and that's a 3-hour difference. So that, I say, hey, let's get together at 8 a.m. What I'm really saying is 5 a.m. my time. If you're even 5 minutes late, you're likely to be dog meat. Expect people to be even more protective of their time on the phone than they are of their time spent in personal meetings. That is so true. Incoming calls may be income-producing calls for them, and they will not want their phone to signal busy to their clients. During the call, listen carefully for any indication that the contact doesn't understand you, has missed the point, or is irritated at something. Given the time constraints of telephone networking, there's an understandable tendency to speak rapidly and cram in as much information sharing as possible. Resist this temptation. If anything, slow your delivery down and finish your thoughts and sentences firmly. Run-on mouths suggest run-on minds, and you can't expect the same tolerance of hemming and hawing that you might get in a face-to-face meeting. Be sure to conduct frequent reality tests. Have I answered your question? Would it help if I elaborated on that a bit? Am I being clear? You won't gain the interest of contacts unless you sound truly interested in what you're doing. This isn't a telephone survey you're conducting. It's your only opportunity to convey a clear and attractive sense of your goals and attributes to someone you may never meet in person. Be animated without being hyper. Be enthusiastic without sounding like a cheerleader or a Pollyanna. The reason behind that is when you're talking on the phone, the amplitude of communication is compressed, which means that you have to almost be a little more elevated in your energy and enthusiasm than you would if you were in person. The best way to be engaging is to be engaged in the conversation. Don't let your mind wander. If you start playing with the cat, looking at the dust balls under your desk and saying, over and over again, instead of concentrating on the conversation, the person on the other end of the line will know you're only going through the motions. The minute that happens, you can kiss rapport goodbye. That's a good point, because a lot of times if we're on the phone, we also have our computer open or a phone, our mobile device. We're looking at something on our mobile device that can be distracting. So eliminate any distractions when you're doing these calls. Long distance networking. I like this. It's so relevant today. Long distance networking. Long distance job searches may require some long distance networking. The reality of both is that you can't hope to canvass the entire country. You'll have to set some geographic priorities, then target only those areas. Your targeting may include planning a trip to a distant city and orchestrating a concentrated networking blitz while you're there. The key action is scheduling your first round of networking meetings before you arrive. Here's an example. Quote, "Jerry, I got your name from Alan, who has told me a good bit about how you moved out to Spokane from New York. Listen, my spouse is being transferred to Spokane and will be relocating there early next year. I'm coming out for a brief reconnaissance visit in August to check out the housing situation and to see whether I can do a little networking. I'm a CPA specializing in small and family-owned businesses, and I need to try to establish a beachhead for a new practice. Is there any chance we can get together on either August 14th or 15th? I'm sorry to box you in so tight, but that's the only time I can get out to meet my contacts. I'm not asking you to lead me to new clients, but I sure could use some help in just getting oriented. I'd really appreciate it if you could squeeze me in, unquote. Low stakes. That's probably one of the best scripts that has been in this chapter. Is it's low stakes, logical. You have an excuse, right? I'm coming out there. I'm not looking for a job. My spouse is being relocated. What a great... So there's a lot of folks that I coach that maybe come from India, and they have a spouse tagging along. And, this is a great excuse for your spouse to get out and network. A good rule of thumb, if you can afford the motel cost, is to extend your trip to twice as many days as you've scheduled for your first round of networking meetings. If you've got one full week filled with 12 to 15 meetings, that's great. Leave a second week open to try to schedule an equal number of second-tier meetings stemming from your first week's referrals. Find a local word processing service before you go, or take along your laptop computer, portable printer, and some stationery. It may be essential to get out some quick thank you notes or meeting request letters, which you'll hand deliver. Set your motel room up like a command bunker and attack the local networking scene for all you're worth. It's funny how the old school stuff still works. A knock and talk, right? Just knocking and talking on somebody's door, I think, is like a 40% success rate. Blind application online is like 8, 7, 10% maybe. So it's like 3 or 4 times more effective just to show up to a place and ask around. Be warned, the 2 weeks will be exhausting. Your plight will elicit the sympathy of most contacts, however, and they'll be flattered that you're abandoning whatever place you live in now to join them in their fair city. Play to the hilt your sense of community and your desire to fit into this new setting. Before your trip, contact the local chamber of commerce and get a packet of information materials. Study it. The people you meet will be pleased and more helpful if they see you've done your homework before imposing yourself on them. When you get back, use the initial contacts you generated to follow up by phone with people you met and to do some additional telephone networking. The fact that you've been out there and learned the lay of the land will allow you to focus on these calls and display your knowledge. People will warm to you even if they can't see you face to face. That's where the video chats and the phone calls come in even today. I'm finding people, because they're isolated, are a little bit more open to conversation. I can't say that's going to be the case when we reopen. People are going to have a backlog of work. They're going to be becoming more accustomed to the new normal, and they're going to be less available once this thing is over. The Grand Falloon Letter, networking by mail. If you're running a geographically diverse job search and haven't focused on 1 or 2 cities in which to target a drop-in bonsai networking campaign, there's one quasi-networking technique that you can try. If you're prepared to sacrifice 2 of the 3 main benefits of networking, the reciprocal exchange of information and the acquisition of more names, you can get yourself an enormous amount of visibility by flooding the country with Grand Falloon letters rather than Grand Falloon phone calls. In today's market, you could do that by email. This technique is akin to saturation bombing, low efficiency but potentially high effectiveness. If you want to penetrate assorted Grand Falloons by mail, you should understand some rules of the game. Conventional job search wisdom says that mass mailings are low probability vehicles. Perhaps no more than 5% of all jobs are located and landed through form letters sent out en masse. To make the most of this technique, moreover, you're supposed to follow up with a phone call. Each letter you send, mass mailings are a direct appeal for employment. So following up with a phone call after a letter is a good idea. Quote, Dear Mr. Smith, if your company should have or anticipate an opening for an experienced cost estimator, I would welcome your consideration. I'm highly motivated, dedicated, ... unquote. A Grand Falloon mailing takes an entirely different tack. It isn't a request for employment. Let me repeat that. It's not a request for employment. It's a candid admission that you're simply looking for market exposure. In a traditional mailing, the stakes are high. Please hire me and pay me a lot of your money, unquote. In a Grand Falloon mailing, the stakes are kept very low. Please take note of who I am and what I do in case you hear of anyone who might need someone like me, unquote. Because Granfalloonian bonds are so thin, you can't ask for a lot of help without helplessly overtaxing the relationship. Your request should be kept low-key and thrown casually into the topic sentence of your letter. Here's an example. Quote, I recently left my position as a Chief Process Control Manager at Zebcor Chemicals, and I've been writing a number of colleagues to acquaint them with my credentials and ask that they keep me in mind if they hear of an appropriate opening, unquote. Another example. Quote, although we haven't met, I've never met another nuclear power plant control room engineer with whom I'd have a lot in common, which is why I'm writing to every senior level engineer I can to develop an informal network of colleagues as I run my job search, unquote. A Granfalloon letter is a useful way to contact people who are your peers but may blow off your networking request because they think you represent a threat to them. Many networkers report that they've shortchanged by potentially useful contacts because they represent some irrational danger to the contact's job security. This problem diminishes when you emphasize that you're a peer, not a competitor. The Granfalloon letter can be adroitly cast to suggest an absolutely riskless agenda. Here's an example, and I quote, to Michael Trapp, Senior Vice President, Durango National Bank, Durango, Colorado. Dear Mike, during my 15 years as Senior Vice President for Commercial Lending with Minnesota National Grain Bank, I periodically would get calls from recruiters looking for qualified candidates for senior-level banking management positions. Given your position and your seniority, I'd be surprised if you don't also get calls like this. That's why I'm writing. It's a tight job market. All the experts recommend getting as much exposure as possible. To this end, I've been writing a number of banking executives, like yourself, not to request that they hire me, but to ask a simple favor. If you are contacted by a headhunter, I'd be grateful if you'd mention my availability. My job at MNGB was eliminated along with 300 others in May, and perhaps suggest where I could be reached. Please understand, Mike, that I'm not asking for a reference. That would be presumptuous. But if I can simply get my name in play, I can champion my own cause from there. I've enclosed a copy of my resume just to give you a feel for my background and experience. If you'd like more information for any reason, I'd be delighted to chat with you. Meanwhile, thanks for your help. I certainly hope I can turn an appropriate favor in the future, unquote. Letters like this may produce no more than their stated purpose, a couple of calls from headhunters. But they also may find their way into a number of hands in the addressee's company and result in a request to come out and chat. We might have something here for you, someone like you. Understand that Granfalloon letters are extremely low efficiency items. You don't try to follow them up all personally, especially if you send out 400 or more. If this technique works at all, it's because of sheer volume. As one sage put it, quote, it's like standing on your back porch in the dark of the moon, firing your shotgun into the night. If you're willing to use up enough shells, you'll eventually get yourself a rabbit, unquote. The outer limits, other offbeat forms of market exposure. If your networking goal is solely to maximize exposure, there are other forms of outreach you may consider. All are inefficient and some are costly, but they may include one that turns the trick for you. Some job seekers invite their network to a spectate activity as the job seeker works through the adventure of changing employers by sending out what are, in effect, newsletters. These may look like personalized letters, or they may be styled as memos or press releases entitled Action Update. They may be postcards. A memorable one was a mailing of a picture postcard depicting a glorious Tahitian sunset. The message on the back read, nope, I'm not here. I'm still in your city trying every technique I can find to position as an ad agency creative director. Another creative type developed and mailed an elaborate 4-color brochure and sent it out as a mailing to 250 creative types at a total cost of $1.70 per mailing. And all it said was Michael Stern, graphic artist. This was extraordinarily costly exposure, but its originality, quality, and sheer daring got Michael a job. There are several problems with any attempts to keep everyone in your network informed through mailings. It's the beauty of the internet right here. 1. Mailings are expensive, both in bucks and in the time and effort needed to prepare them. However, I would suggest that nowadays it's super easy to delete an email. Snail mail might actually get you the results that you need. Number 2, they either require follow-up or they operate on the theory that if someone hears of something really hot, they'll call you. 3, if the job search extends a long time, the periodic updates become testimonials on to your pain, your struggle, or your ineffectiveness as a job seeker. They may then have the ironic effect of driving people away from a drowning man rather than encouraging support and help. So make sure you are conscious of the people you might be sending job search updates to. I think it's an effective tool personally, but if everybody sent me a job search update that I ever met, that would be problematic. So the people that I really have good relationships with, have rapport with, if they send me an update, I'm actually appreciative of that, even if they've been looking for a long time. Formalizing the network, your own advisory board. Many businesses and organizations have boards of directors or trustees to lend their collective judgment, evaluate progress, provide feedback, set priorities, and plan the organization's activities. Some enterprising networkers have used this model to enlist the help of a group of acquaintances or colleagues to serve as a semi-formal advisory board for their job search efforts. These can't be casual acquaintances. They should be people who believe in you and are willing to invest considerable time and effort in your future. You're going to be asking a lot of them, and they should know this before committing to serve. Perhaps once a month or even 6 weeks, your group should get together with you. You buy the beer and pizza and systematically review your progress and plans. In order to work well and not become a cheerleading squad, your advisory board must agree to be disciplined, candid, realistic, and if need be, tough on you. Before you ask 5 or 6 people to serve on your board for the duration of your job search, you must prepare some guidelines for their responsibilities, a mission statement, an outline of tasks and functions, and a description of their specific roles or expertise, and the scope of their control. For each meeting, you must prepare an agenda and status update report, including a statistical summary of ads answered, letters mailed, calls made, meetings held, follow-ups completed, and so on. For many networkers, the idea of a continuing executive network is too extreme, too formal, too demanding on the helpers, too time-consuming, and too structured. For others, the idea of having a sustained source of objective feedback promotes a strong sense of stability and continuity in the job search. In networking, as in many other challenges of life, you must find approaches that feel good to you, that keep you energized, or that convince you that you're capitalizing on opportunities that less adventuresome souls would never discover. If you feel an approach or technique isn't working for you, if it's too uncomfortable, or if its potential payoff is poor or speculative, abandon it. There are plenty of other approaches to occupy your time. That's probably the best advice in this whole chapter. If you feel an approach or technique is not working for you, if it's too uncomfortable, or if its a potential payoff is poor, the return on investment is poor, abandon it. Abandon it. That's what I say for a lot of people that aren't getting results from online applications. That completes chapter 10. One thing I would say, in that last section, they talked a lot about having an executive, what did they call it? A board of directors or trustees. If you've ever read the What Color is Your Parachute book, they talk in there about what's called job group. I think it's called job group. Job club. So it's a networking group, or a group of people going through a career transition job search together, and they meet and support each other. And so that's what I would seek out. In fact, I host one with a good friend of mine, Scott, my podcast co-host. In fact, if you haven't taken a look at our podcast, I suggest it. jobseekersradio.com, or you can find it on iTunes, Job Seekers Radio. And there's a lot of good information nuggets there in the episodes that we've done. I think we're approaching 70 or 80 episodes. Anyway, But the value of having a group like that is you have peers that are going through the same thing you are. And you can share those experiences, hold each other accountable, encourage each other when you need it. And I find those kind of things really, really valuable. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer. I know there's a lot that we covered today. Good news, there's only one more chapter in this book, chapter 11, and it's really short. So next week, maybe we'll have some celebration or bring some friends. Maybe if you're interested, if you have enjoyed the book club side of things, then we could maybe do another book if there's one out there that you're interested in. So good to have you. Stanley, hey, welcome. Good to have you. Looks like Venki is here. Venki, good to have you. Awesome. So, I mean, if you think this is valuable to somebody, please, by all means, go ahead and share this session with them. Share it to your networks on LinkedIn, maybe even Twitter or Facebook. But good. Any questions out there that I can answer? Well, it looks like my... All right. Hi, Hasina. Good to see you. Looks like my video here has frozen. Yeah, anyway. So if you're on LinkedIn and you have any questions, just holler at me. Put them in the chat. The good news is Restream, which is the service that I broadcast on, broadcasts to 4 different channels, and they just announced integration with LinkedIn chat. So I am receiving your chats on this side. I just can't send responses. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. I did have, believe it or not, in the last week, I had a person that I am collaborating with that got 2 job offers. I have several of my coaching clients, my candidates that I'm working with that are interviewing actively. In fact, I had one just before I got on the call today, also got an offer. So people are still interviewing, people are getting offers. You just need to engage with the companies that are in play. And there's probably, they're probably easier to identify because there aren't that many that are in play. So anyway, keep that in mind. If you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. I'm happy to answer. Good to have you here. Yeah, so the video, for whatever reason, is buffering on YouTube. All right, folks. Well, I hope you have a great weekend. I thank you for joining me for this Career Happy Hour. Make it great. I'm here every Friday, 3 p.m. If you have any questions, let me know. You can send them to me by private